this is a movie star. Sometimes I think we forget in 2023, we got a lot of actors. We watch a lot of streaming TV shows. There's a lot of made for Netflix films. We are inundated with actors and actresses. But every once in a while, when you see a Mel Gibson, you're reminded there's still movie stars out there.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is James, as ever, with my friend Steve. And this episode, we are talking about Allan Ungar's Bandit.
Hey, you know the drill, though. If you haven't already subscribed, it'd be great if you did. Helps us with the algorithm, gets the show out to more people. And just as a reminder, we do spoilers here, so you've been warned. James?
Okay, so Bandit, it's kind of a sort of neo-noir action heist movie based on a true story about the Flying Bandit. I think the biggest point to raise immediately is this is a Canadian movie. This is not an American movie. This is a Canadian, based on a true story about which I didn't know anything going into this. Had you heard of the Flying Bandit?
I had never heard of the Flying Bandit. I knew nothing about this film. I don't think I've gone into a film with less pre-knowledge in recent months as I have Bandit.
Yeah, no, I was probably about the same. I mean, I'm aware of the director. I've seen one or two of his other movies. Tended to be sort of lower budget, sort of stripped down action movies. From that ilk. Obviously, familiar faces in the cast. You got Josh Duhamel, Elisha Cuthbert, who we all knew from 24, and Mel Gibson. This is part of Mel Gibson's creeping sort of renaissance. I'm not sure if he's been forgiven by everybody so far, or if he ever will be, but he is, sort of back and doing this kind of role. And essentially, it's set during the 1980s and follows our hero, who we're not even entirely sure what his real name is, I don't think, in the movie. Certainly his nearest and dearest aren't particularly certain. And the film is told in flashback. It's sort of in media res. It begins, the middle of the story, and he's like, needle scratch. Yeah. Well, you might think I'm in a sort of tricky situation. This is what happens. And he shows that he was in financial straits and just almost on a whim decides to go out and rob a bank, discovers that he has sort of a knack for it, and sort of gets the itch, gets the bug, and before he knows it, cash is coming in. He's wearing all kinds of crazy disguises, and he can go in and out, no fuss, no muss, without causing any problem. And this is the story of his rise and fall, if you like.
James, like I said, I knew nothing about this film going in. Bandit could have been about a drug bust at the U.S.-Mexican border for all I knew. So I was pleasantly surprised when I realized this was going to be one of those quirky, caper type films with crime and a really witty protagonist who doesn't kill anybody. It's one of those crooks with the hearts of gold. It almost has that Ocean's 11 feel. Instead of it being a team, it's just a singular guy who's got a lot of witty one-liners, who has an outlook in life that's fairly positive, despite the fact that he robs banks for a living. And he's the kind of guy you'd want to have a beer with if he wasn't a crook.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of fair to the point. I mean, I did kind of sort of make a little note as I was watching this movie, and which kind of actually goes against what you were saying a little bit, where I felt that it needed a bigger star, if you like. It needed a bigger personality in the lead. I thought that you could tell from the script. I thought by and large the script was pretty tight. The script was pretty sort of well done. Goes through its paces. It's structured pretty well. And all the rest of it. But I just felt that Josh Duhamel didn't quite have. So the movie that it kept making me think of was Out of Sight, the George Clooney movie, and I guess it's unfair. Yeah, okay. It's unfair when you hold anybody up against George Clooney. You're going to come out looking a little sort of bland and charisma free. But my biggest takeaway, I think, really was if they'd had a bigger star, obviously the budget would have gone up and all the rest of it, and it would have become a much more expensive movie. Who had that kind of sort of little twinkle in his eye, just a little bit more sort of natural charisma, I think it would have just punched it up a step. And I think that's kind of what it lacked, because, as sort of, sort of charming and non-violent and sort of all the rest of it that our protagonist is, I never really quite warmed to him as much as I felt that the movie wanted me to. And I think that that's the reason.
Well, let me say, you didn't totally cut across me, because I had a similar thought, not exactly, but I think Josh Duhamel does a good job. He does have a certain air of charisma, but he seems like the brother from another mother to Timothy Oliphant, and Timothy Oliphant
I've
would
always
have
thought
been
that about him.
perfect. Absolutely perfect in this role because he had kind of that Justified character. He's playing almost the same type of character, except on Justified, Timothy Oliphant would play the cop rather than the robber, but still it was a similar demeanor and worldview, so to speak.
Yeah, he has a sort of that sort of cheeky swagger about him that, you know, he's a kind of a, you know, a bad guy, but a bad guy that you kind of like anyway. And with Josh Duhamel, he's just, I guess, too nice, I think was what happened for me. And so you never quite kind of felt that he was, you know, roguish enough, I suppose would be the word. But you know, he does the best he can with what he's got, and it's perfectly. It sounds like damning with fake praise, but he's perfectly serviceable. You know, he carries the film perfectly fine. One thing that struck me, because obviously he turns to Mel Gibson's kind of low level crime boss for help and for financing early on in his operation. I did start thinking a younger Mel Gibson would have been actually pretty damn good in the central role.
Yeah. Because Mel Gibson had that level of charisma, that twinkle in the eye that you mentioned. But you know, I love any film that just has a great smartass in it. You know, give me Fletch, give me Chevy Chase, give me him in, you know, Caddyshack. Just he's just operating at a wavelength that's, you know, half a degree above everybody else in the room, and that's what this character was. And like you said, I agree. Josh Duhamel, I think does a fine job, but I think it could have been taken to 11, and it wasn't.
Yeah, agree. I mean, looking at Mel Gibson, I thought he was pretty good. Mel Gibson has still got it, definitely, which is kind of frustrating when, you know, it's 2023 and it's like, are we supposed to be canceling Mel Gibson? Is he supposed to be out of the picture now? And then he comes along and he's doing a lot of these sort of smaller movies where, you know, outside of the studio system, if you like, and he still does such a good job with it. You know,
I was thinking at one point when one of the B-list actors was engaging with Mel Gibson, I thought, this guy's got to be thinking, oh my God, I'm acting with Mel Gibson, you know, because there seems to be such a power dynamic, like you said, because Mel's not doing Braveheart now. He's doing these smaller indie films to kind of, as I guess his penance or whatever it is, for him to maybe one day come back in full graces of Hollywood again. Will we ever see him presenting at the Oscars?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because there was a joke about that, wasn't it? I think, was it Ricky Gervais made a joke about it, because he was kind of cancelled, if you like, to use that expression, for a bit, and then he came back directing Hacksaw Ridge and was nominated for Best Director at the Oscars for that, and that seemed to be him being welcomed back, if you like. And I remember Ricky Gervais was like made a joke about how long does someone get cancelled for? 8 years. That's what it is. It's 8 years, which is the amount of time that Mel Gibson had been away for. Yeah, but not to dwell on that. You know, he's definitely not back in the good graces as in sufficiently enough to land big roles in like a Marvel movie or anything like that. Which we can see that his peers are certainly doing these days. But so he is doing these smaller movies. But his power comes through, his charisma comes through. I mean, Tommy, his character here, is sort of the target of this kind of. Well, it's not FBI because it's Canadian, but the authorities are staking him out and stumble upon the Flying Bandit and his operation almost by accident. But so Tommy's not exactly the most dangerous of criminals, and he is somewhat sort of benevolent, which makes financier, isn't he? Really, rather than a sort of bad guy per se.
Which makes Mel Gibson the perfect character, the perfect actor to play him, because Mel Gibson's never going to play a really, really evil guy. He's just too likable. And that's what came across in this film. I was thinking, I was making a mental note. This is a movie star. Sometimes I think we forget in 2023, we got a lot of actors. We watch a lot of streaming TV shows. There's a lot of made for Netflix films. We are inundated with actors and actresses. But every once in a while, when you see a Mel Gibson, you're reminded there's still movie stars out there. And in this film, I'm reminded, despite the role being quite maybe limited as opposed to some of his grander roles. This guy's a movie star, and he still has it, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he did play a few sort of bad guys. I mean, he was the villain in Expendables 3, wasn't he? And which was kind of after the fact.
But even that's a parody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's what I was
Expendables
going to say. Is that he can't
a-
quite shake off the star power, the cheeky chappy kind of persona that he built his career on. Even when he's playing like a real sort of corrupt racist cop in this movie Dragged Across Concrete from about 5 years ago, which is
I didn't see that.
it's worth kind of checking out. It's a pretty kind of sort of nasty, gritty cop movie, but it's worth checking out. And in that, he is kind of like a bad guy. But here he's he's not on autopilot. He's doing the work that is available to him, but he's bringing his charisma, he's bringing his star power to it. And I think it helps a movie like this get recognized, because if it was just Josh Duhamel in it, I'm not sure that quite so many people would have gravitated towards it. But by all accounts, it's doing actually quite well on the streaming platforms and Redbox and whatever like that. I think it's finding a sort of a home audience, and you got to suspect that it's Mel Gibson who's bringing that in.
Yeah, it's a good fun movie, but I think where it kind of lost me was in the third act, when this arrest is going to come and the culmination's happening, and they fell into the trope that has been used more times than I can imagine, or that I can remember over the last 30-40 years I've been watching films, is where the guy and the girl sitting there, and the guy says, "It's the only thing I've ever been good at, but we had a deal." And I thought, oh God, how many times have I heard this one? And I think because of the nature of it being based on real events and being an actual crime, is they couldn't really exaggerate too much. And so I found the final, robbery and eventual capture of him fairly anticlimactic.
Yeah, I think, if I've got a couple of issues with it, I think the biggest issue is I think it's a bit long. I think it runs just over 2 hours long, and it should have been a sort of a tight 90 minutes. And I think it feels
actually I was gonna push back on you. I was happy it was under 2 hours. It's like, yeah, it's actually under 2. And to me, any film that's under 2 hours, I never criticize.
Oh, yeah. I think any movie that's over 89 minutes is too long. Right.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I'm being facetious,
I think I've seen so many bloated times. We were just recently talking before we started this about the upcoming John Wick film is topping off at close to 3 hours. I'm thinking, crikey, why does it have to? Of course, we haven't seen it yet, so we'll reserve our judgment. But by and large, films do not have to be 3 hours long.
No, absolutely. And so thank goodness that this isn't. But I still felt that it could have been shorter, it could have been tighter. Wrap it up in about 90 to 100 minutes, and I think it does feel that in the third act. When you're not, because I think for the first 2 acts you're telling like the build up, you're telling a lot of story, you're covering a lot more time and a lot more ground in a shorter amount of time, so it has to be edited for pace and tightened up. Whereas the third act in these kind of movies tends to be sort of that one last heist. It's a day or it's 2 days, so it's kind of approaching close to real time almost, and so that's where things start to drag a little bit. The other thing that kind of I was disappointed by is that the movie starts out and Josh Duhamel is talking to the camera, and he's literally kind of sort of turning, and it's making asides to the viewer. He's bringing you in, he's breaking the fourth wall, and he's like, "Yeah, this is my life. It's pretty crazy." And for about the first 10 minutes of the movie, he does that. And then he doesn't really do it anymore. And I would have liked that sort of throughout. The fact that, to have the character being aware that he's, he's got an audience and that he's recounting this great sort of story. Because it's presented to you as a kind of sort of stranger than fiction, if this didn't really happen, you'd never believe it kind of story. And then it's not as crazy as perhaps it could have been, and you can't change what really happened, but the tone that it's presented to you with is, buckle up, you're not going to believe this, but all of this is true. And then you're like, so you're kind of waiting for that kind of craziness to happen, and it never really does. There's 1 or 2 points where it's like he left his gun behind, and you're like, sure, okay, that's fine, but it's presented in such a way that the events should have been crazier. So I think a way of getting kind of round that would have been just to keep the wall breaking throughout, so that he was just sort of talking to you about it and just being kind of like, this is my life, this is really what happened. But it's introduced and then abandoned, and I think that was a disappointment, because I was ready for him to take me by the hand through this caper.
It's an interesting point. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that would have helped, especially in the third act, as you said, because for me, why it kind of stalled was not only because the end robbery just was a little anticlimactic for me, but all those little fun things that got us there. Him showing Mel Gibson how he could rob the bank across the street in under 3 minutes. And, it's fun moments like that draw me into these kind of films, that makes it light and fun. And I'm on a roller coaster, and I've just gone up another hill and I'm going down again. And I knew I was going to enjoy this film from the first 30 seconds. And the reason it was, they flashed the timestamp. I think they said London 1986. And again, because I had no idea about this film, I'm thinking, oh, we're in London, great, I'm looking forward to getting to London this summer. And then it goes Ontario, and I thought, that's funny. I love that. That's my kind of humor. They had me at that moment, and then it just got better from that. By and large, I thought this was a fun roller coaster.
Yeah, no, I think I enjoyed it. I mean, I think it is it's a genre that I am predisposed to enjoy. A good bank robbery, heist, caper. I love them. And there are good ones and there are plenty of bad ones. And I think that this wisely, emulates the best ones, but without sort of showing itself up too much. You can overreach and overstretch and expose your own weaknesses. And I think by and large, this one, understands its limitations. And understands where it can show off its strengths and where to kind of hold back a little bit, and fits nicely in the middle. It's not a classic of the genre, and I don't think it's I think it's completely aware of the fact that it's not, but it is, as you say, a fun roller coaster, and sits comfortably, holds its own comfortably within a genre where there are some real classics and some real stinkers.
Well, James, as we draw this to a close, we need an instrument of measurement. How are we going to measure Bandit out of a scale of 1 to 5?
I was thinking fake noses.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, perfect. Fake noses.
Okay, so I'll go first. I think for all the reasons that I have said before, it's slick, it's competently handled, well written, well directed, well performed. Could have been tightened up a little bit. I do think it would have benefited from having sort of someone with a little bit more natural charisma in the lead, but again, I understand why it doesn't. That would have been just more prohibitively expensive, I suppose. But by and large, it held my attention, it kept me entertained, and you can't really ask for more than that. Rock solid, 3 noses out of 5.
I'm going to go a little bit higher than you. I really enjoyed it. And anytime I have my expectations exceeded, I just tend to just be more gracious in my awarding of the stars. Like you said, this is not a slam dunk. This is not the pinnacle of the genre, but it's a nice installment in that genre. And I'm going to be gracious and give it 4 fake noses. Yeah, I enjoyed this. This was fun. It's a fun movie. And I think people would enjoy the roller coaster ride that it brings.
Excellent. Well, that's our opinion. Have you seen Bandit? Do let us know. What are your favorites of the bank heist crime caper genre? There are some absolute belters out there. Let us know in the comments. We look forward to hearing from you.
I think off the top of my head, crime caper, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Ocean's 11 have to top my, just as you're thinking about it. But as James says, what are yours? We'd love to have a discussion with you about it. Till next episode.
Goodbye.
You're wonderful
Bye.
to see. You ought to be in pictures all